Yesterday, he laid the foundations, in a way, of the whole framework of Indian music, both the marga, the classical line, and the folk, and also emphasized the interplay of the two, how they are basically inseparable and constantly enriching each other. I believe today Professor Srinivas Reddy is going to illustrate some of what he explained yesterday with specific examples, including some videos. And we're going to listen and listen at a deeper level than usual, because hopefully we'll be able to identify those different strands that go into the composition of the Indian systems of music. So as usual, you are welcome to enter your comments and questions either in the Google Meet chat box for our students, or on the YouTube comments for those who have joined on the live stream in YouTube. Thank you. Srinivas, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Janino, and all the IKS team. It's wonderful to be back and to round out this presentation on the classical and folk interaction with, I think, more examples from the music. And actually, I'm happy that Professor Janino had mentioned video also, because in the Natya Shastra, actually, there's a very clear verse that says that this music or art, more generally, is both shravyam and drishyam. It should be seen and it should be heard. And this is a very interesting thing, because there was a period, I mean, most of our history where, you know, there's no recorded music, there's no CDs, there's no records, and if you wanted to hear music, you had to go somewhere and, you know, be with musicians, and you had to watch them also. So there was no way that you could disembody hearing and seeing. These dual sensory perceptions were always together, because some things had to be live, things had to be in the moment. So that's really important. It's interesting now that, you know, there was a period where we had, you know, not iPod, what was it? Yeah, iPod came and all of that stuff. So then people just had hundreds of songs, you know, in their pocket. That was the whole thing. And so the audio-ness, the audio quality became disembodied from like the physicality of either the material that it was used as in a CD or whatever, but also from any kind of visual perception. Then we had the rise of YouTube. So now we're back to an AV thing, but it's not live anymore. So these things all move in kind of circular ways, and it's quite interesting to look at it. But, you know, live music is still live music. And then now we have pandemic. So you can see, you know, performing artists are really struggling right now. I mean, the whole life of a musician is to travel and to, you know, move around and to give concerts, to connect with people in live settings. That's really their bread and butter. That's their life. So it's been a difficult time. You know, of course, people are doing things on Zoom like we're doing now and all of that stuff, but it's just not the same. And hopefully one day we'll soon enough get back to those kinds of things. So just a small note about that. And you'll have to forgive me if I go off on these little bit of tangents, but, you know, these ideas come when you're with people, when you're interacting with people. And that's also part of the Indian way of doing things. You have a certain kind of fixity. So I have these slides that I want to show, but in between there, we have to improvise. And that's really the heart of Indian music, is improvisation. And again, this is another key quality of what we would call the Indic paradigm, I would say, is the sense of an improvisatory nature of movement. And the important thing to remember about improvisation is not willy-nilly stuff. It's not like I can play whatever I want. You know, a raga, for example, we improvise in raga all the time, but rag has some very strict, you know, formulations about it. Within that strictness is a vast amount of freedom. And in fact, the point to be made is that it is through that kind of formality of theory that we are given the opportunity to create expansion of thought and to, you know, expand and be innovative. If you don't have something that's holding you, you know, in certain ways, then the improvisation can go anywhere. So this is how that interplay is working. That theoretical formulation with the practical kind of realization, always interacting, but within certain kinds of boundaries and frameworks. So that's the main thing, is that there's a framework. It's not a fixed rule, but it's a general rule. And this is the important thing, the use of generalized principles rather than very point-on specific, you must do this or you have to do that. It's, well, you generally want to do this and you generally want to do that. So this concept, again, is also very important to the Indian paradigm, epistemology, not only in the arts, but in all disciplines of knowledge. Which is why the whole, you know, this series is so critical, because, you know, Indian knowledge systems, even within the variety of the different knowledge systems, there are certain unifying principles which connect all of these disciplines, because it's an approach to what knowledge is. And again, to bring it back to this first slide, knowledge in India is embodied. It has to, it inters inside of a person. Yes, we have granthas. Yes, we have shastras. All this is there. That's fine. It's good. But the true knowledge lives in a human being and is passed down through human beings. That really, for me, is the real heart of it. And if you ask anyone who learned anything, and you hear me talking all the time, I'm always going back and saying, my guru taught me this, my guru taught, because that's where I learned it all. And, you know, this is how we also give citation. You know, this is the way that you always, and you saw even how Sarangadeva was giving, Ramamatya was giving citation of Sarangadeva Suri. He says that very many times. He says, as the master has said, this, like that. We give this respect to the tradition. That's how it comes. But as we also saw yesterday, part of that respect for that tradition means I'm going to also add my touch to it. And, you know, my music guru would always tell me, you know, I'm teaching you this rag or I'm teaching you this thing, but you have to make it your own. That's your job. Like, you have to add your touch to it. You can't just parrot me and mimic everything I'm doing. That's not how the art really works. The art works by, okay, yes, in the beginning you copy, you try to imitate everything, but as you grow as an artist, you have to bring in your own touch. Now, returning to this picture, this yogic body, and the whole idea that music is one of many margas, one of many pathways for self-realization. That is the point. So that all Indian arts, in fact, all Indian knowledge, period, the ultimate goal of any pursuit of knowledge is knowledge of self, knowing thyself. That's what it is. Aham Brahmasmi. This great Mahavakya is really the end goal of any pursuit of knowledge. So this seems like a lofty idea. You know, we say, oh, this is the classical stuff. This is for all this self-realization and, you know, folk music, this Janapada Gitas and all this stuff. This is kind of just for entertainment. Well, again, this binary needs to be broken down. And one of the most amazing, I think I was talking about it earlier yesterday before the presentation, is the Baul musicians. Now, the Baul musicians of Bengal, West Bengal, East Bengal, also all that region, Eastern India, they represent a fascinating amalgamation of many threads that are coming in. There's Buddhist stuff, there's Sufi stuff, there's Hindu stuff, there's tantric stuff. Like this yogic body might be classified as a, you know, kind of a tantric representation of the human body. All of those things, ragas, folk melodies, desi ragas, all of it, all of that is coming together in these Baul singers. So I'll move to the first slide and play some examples of this, and also show you how this Baul music is also very related even to my own training, because my Parama Guru Pandit Nikhil Banerjee, loved baul music. And would incorporate a small baul piece of music usually in his concerts at the end. You know, what we call light music comes at the end. I always remember my guru always saying, there's nothing light about this stuff. It's, you know, it's heavy stuff. And it's true. To play this music, it's not easy either. You know, just because we think classical is something hard and folk music is, it's not true at all. It takes incredible skill and dedication and mastery to play what we call folk music or light music. So here we go. The baul music, and I'll show you the images at the bottom there. I just wanted to show it before I play the music. The traditional, again, the simple folk music of the bauls is usually realized on the ektara. Ektara, of course, means one string. So, or sometimes they have dotara, which is the third one that you see there. Now, this ektara, very simple. Literally, it is one string, and there's a couple different varieties of ektara you can also see. Now, the dotara also a little bit different, but you know, a couple more strings. Actually, it has more than 2 strings. I think it's like 4 usually, and you'll see the dotara player in this next one. But the other instruments that you see there are sitara, like I play, which again, you know, actually means 3 strings, but it has 20 strings, or my current sitar has about 20 strings. And then the instrument on the far right there is the sarod. And you can see the design of these instruments, how similar they are. So there's like, you know, it's like a spectrum of even the instruments, of the ways that these things evolved. Okay, yeah, you can add extra strings. We call what we call tarafdar strings instruments. That means those are with sympathetic strings, which is a pretty modern invention for Indian instruments. But all of those kind of innovations have their root and fundamental principle and design in the very simple kind of ektaras and dotaras of you know, the folk tradition, you could say. So all I wanted to stress was that even the instruments themselves also have this kind of folk classical interplay that's always going on. And there's another interesting example of that. So here we go. I'll play a little clip of these baul musicians, and I'm trying to keep all these clips. I've tried to find very small ones, so because it is important to listen and just to see how, you know, these are itinerant musicians moving around, singing songs. And again, if you want to say that folk music is just for some kind of entertainment, well, this stuff is really a spiritual practice. The baul musicians are like tantrakaric practitioners, and they're singing these songs as a way of expressing that divinity and their connection to the, you know, whole cosmos. And so when you listen to particularly the baul musicians, and there's very nice videos where people interview them and asking them about, you know, the very esoteric nature of some of these songs, like Lolon Fakir. If you listen to those songs, they're not easy to understand exactly what's going on, because there's an esoteric nature to them, in the sense like it's a tantric kind of interpretation of things. And all of this stuff is, again, directed towards self-realization. So here we go. let's pause that there. Now I'll play how a classical artist like Nikhil Banerjee takes these melodies and, you know, kind of not kind of reformats them, but realizes them in his own way through his own instrument in what we would consider a classical setting. Although, you know, like I said, I if there's any big point I want to make is we need to move away from these kinds of categorizations. That's the main thing, is that these categories are more fluid than we want to really realize. Okay, so I could go on listening to this stuff, but I just wanted to make the point again that how these are interacting, how classical artists borrow from folk music, and now I'll show some examples how folk music borrows from classical music, and also again to stress this point about the instruments, you know, the actual you know, structure and design of these instruments. The classical instruments, what we're going to sitar and sarod today, they're really folk instruments, you could say, that were, you know, basically have more strings on them and refined in a certain sense. And this idea of refinement is important. I think yesterday I'd mentioned also about everything about that I'm saying music is exactly parallel to what is true of Indian languages. For example, there is an idea, basically, you know, Sanskrit is the, you know, mother of all languages. Sakala bhasha janani. You know, like there's this idea that there's this beautiful Sanskrit here, and then it slowly like de-evolved into the Prakrits and into what we consider like modern, let us say, North Indian languages. Well, the reality of it is exactly the opposite, if anything. Sanskritam, by its own definition, is a refinement. A refinement of what? A refinement of one particular Prakrit of some kind. And then, so you have someone like Panini. Now, talk about theory and practice. You know, grammar. This is what I was saying. Like the lakshya, the thing that you say ought to be. That's what grammar is. There's a grammar in music, there's a grammar in language. Now, what people actually speak and what people actually play, that's a little bit different. I mean, it's related to that grammar, but it usually deviates at some level. And that's why Vyakarana needs to be updated from time to time. Same thing, Sangita Shastra needs to be updated from time to time. In this way, you know, what Panini did was he took, you know, one of the probably more elevated and well-respected Prakrits, maybe in that region that he was in, and he classicalized it. He formalized it with these rules. he reified that and made Sanskritam. Sanskritam means something refined and polished and nice. So again, that word, Sangita, Samskrita, all of that, the same thing. Is that there's a perfection of it. And it's an active process. The other word, the definition of Sanskrit is artificial. Because it is in contrast to, I mean, I don't like that word, but it's in contrast to Prakrita. The Prakritas, as we know, Prakriti means nature. So Prakrita, it's evolving naturally. They move, they change, they evolve. Samskrita is kind of perfect, well-formed, stable. Now, we all know that although Sanskrit is kind of, you could say pan-Indic and universal, there's also regional forms of Sanskrit. There are very different ways that people use Sanskrit. In the South, later period in the South is a very different kind of Sanskrit. You can tell, who, where, and which person kind of wrote something by the type of Sanskrit that they're using. So even something great like that, great as in the great tradition, or something of a mārga nature, classical nature, is also variable. In music, it's the same thing. Take, for example, a canonical raga like Rageshri, like I was mentioning yesterday. Now, yes, most people play Rageshri same, but every gharana, that is the different schools of music, and we won't have time to get into all of this stuff, but the different schools of music and different lineages, different sampradayas, people have different interpretations. One person says, yes, in our gharana, my guru, he plays a little bit of Shuddhani in Rageshri. Who are you to say? And then the other guy says, yeah. And then he says, oh, but in the Shastra, it's written like this. And then the guy said, well, I have another Shastra that's written like this. So like that, they go on back and forth. So even within these kind of margic modalities, there is also variability. So the whole point is that in the Indian theoretical system, these ideas of, fixity, change, mārga-deśi, pan-Indic, regional, all of those things were set up only so that we could understand their interaction, not so that we could reify them as separate things. Okay, so continuing on. Next. Oh yeah, so I had given an article. This is a fantastic article written by my dear friend who I was in graduate school with, Shalini Ayagari. She actually came to IIT and gave a wonderful talk. This was, I don't know, many years ago when we were still in Chankera days. But Shalini, she did some wonderful research, ethnographic work with these Manganiyar musicians right on the India-Pakistan border. And, she gets into this whole discussion about, borderlands, borders of categories, what is classical, what is folk, what is not. So it's an interesting article. You should check it out. Some of her more recent work is about how folk artists, for example, have now been kind of elevated to this kind of international status. So like there's a lot of these Manganiyar musicians that go around the world, and I'll show you a couple examples of this. And so there's a big discussion about, what happens when folk music kind of gets like put onto this larger classical stage, or an international audience perceives folk music. What does that mean? Can it really exist in that kind of context? How is it changing? What is it doing to the other musicians who are basically still, in their more traditional setting? So there's a lot of questions. So let me play one little bit just to get a feel for the type of music, and then I'll show you another video of an Indian theater director who put together this. It's called the Manganiyar Seduction, and it was quite popular. But again, it raises a lot of questions of, is there a type of kind of exploitation? Is there a kind of mystification, or even a type of orientalization of our own traditions going on as we kind of present these different kinds of musicians and traditions to the outside world? So anyway, let's hear the traditional setting first. So, one thing I just want to point out, you can kind of notice also the similarity with even the setting of the Baal singers. Usually you have one main singer, you have a supporting singer, you have multiple percussion instruments supporting the main percussion instrument, which is usually like, a barrel drum. So not like tabla, but a barrel drum. So it's even in the picture below, you have, again, there's a community quality to a lot of these performers. So let me now play a very different kind of setting. These guys are in the village somewhere doing their thing, and now you have a very different setting when this music is, deracinated. It is taken out of its context. It's uprooted from, its natural setting, and for good or bad or whatever, it's put onto a, international stage. All right. So when I watch this, I really feel it didn't have the power that the first piece had. The first piece had a kind of like intensity of emotion. This is a different kind of thing, but it's interesting to me also how you see that all the musicians are siloed out into their own little cubicles. And I think that really represents that kind of, extraction of things from their setting. But, this is just one aspect of how music evolves over time. These Manganiyar musicians, there's a lot of them now getting a lot of good concerts and surviving and finding a livelihood through this. So this is also part of what's important about the evolution of arts and how things move along. So if you do get a chance to read that article, it's fascinating. Just to give one small example of, I think, one of the most interesting things that Professor Ayagari discusses in that is, these are all Muslim musicians who are at the court of these Hindu kings, and they have a game that they play. And it's a fascinating little game where both the musicians and the Raja and probably the courtiers there as well, but everyone in that sabha knows some degree of raga music, and they play this game of like, find the hidden, treasure. And so the Raja will start moving in one direction, and then the musician plays rag, whatever, meg, and rag meg means, you're going in the wrong direction, or you need to go south. So then the Raja goes south, and then he plays rag, whatever, kalyan, and that means go west. So then he goes west. So like that, they start playing a game together based on rags and directions. It's a fascinating thing. I've never heard of this anywhere else. So these, purported folk musicians actually have a high degree of classical type of raga knowledge, and she gets into the complexities of this and why that's the case. And it's a really fascinating article, and she's done some more work on the Manganiyars, particularly in regard to kind of what I was just talking about now, modernity and the evolution of these folk arts vis-a-vis a kind of more international stage presentation. So let's move on. Oops. There we go. Oh yeah. So here's a perfect example of how now the Manganiyars are coming back together into the classical fold and working together with classical artists in a type of fusionist type of setting. And the interesting, one of the reasons why I chose this also is because this is Rahul Sharma. He's the son of Pandit Shivkumar Sharma, who is very famous for bringing the santur onto the classical stage. Prior to that, santur was considered a folk instrument of Kashmir, not refined enough to realize raga forms. And of course, through his own dedication, innovation, hard work, Shiv Kumar Sharma ji was able to create a very beautiful and incredibly deep way to realize classical music. And so he became kind of like the classicalizer of the santur. So now the santur is considered also a classical instrument. It's not just a folk instrument, which of course that even a statement like that is not just, that just part is not what we want. Santur is great as a folk instrument. Okay, it can also play raga music. That's it. And what we're seeing now is Rahul Sharma, the son of this instrument that has been classicalized, okay, is now being again reintroduced into its kind of folk origins and integrated with folk music from a different part of India, into one kind of thing. So this is the picture I want to give of like this circularity of one thing is classical one day, it's folk the next day, like that it goes on and on and on, for all time. So let's listen to this, and you can see both. You see in the middle here, you have the tabla with the santur in what we would consider a classical format. If I really wanted to do a bigger presentation, I would have showed you santur in Kashmir, how it was performed like as a folk instrument prior to Shiv Kumar Sharma's innovation. But let us say santur is now a classical instrument with the tabla here in the typical setting with just two artists, and then on the left-hand side here, you have the Manganiyars with all their typical instruments with a group of people together. And then on the right hand, you have now drums and bass and keyboard. So Western music. So all of this now coming together in one place. So let's listen now.
देखकर तुमको हे बालम जी हमारा हिंदो चावल दो बालम जी हमारा हिंदो चावल दो हिंदो बतावा हिंदो बतावा बंदर जाग बालम जी हमारा सायब जी हमारा आत्म जी हमारा हिंदो चावल दो बालम जी हमारा चावल दो
Great. So this just reminded me one other thing in the article that again is gets to the heart of what we're discussing. When people, I mean, of course, the Manganiyars use rags. They talk about rags, as I was just explaining. But most of the time, when you go and talk to the artists, the performers, and say, "Oh, what rag is?" or no, can you tell me about this rag? They won't sit and give you, say, you know, oh, it has komalni and it has this and it skips this note is varjit and all. No, or this is vadi. This is none of that. They'll say, oh yeah, there's a song that's like this. Means what? Means the theory of that raga is embedded within the song itself. And that song itself is the authority. That is the Shastra. That's a beautiful thing. And even in, I mean, look, like I was saying yesterday, I mean, any real classical performing artist, they also do say the same thing. I mean, anytime there's some disagreement about this, nobody goes to Bhatkhande to get the answer. You go to when Ustad Bari Ghulam Ali Khan Sahib sang that Bandish, he sang it with the Shuddhani. So therefore, you know, that's it. That gives authority more. So this is, again, a point about how the practice, the lived performative quality as expressed by an artist always takes precedence over Shastra, over something written. Not to say that we don't go to the Shastras and all that stuff, but particularly in performing arts, you know, that's the idea. They're performing arts. They're arts that need to live through performance and through the embodiedness of their life inside of a musician or an artist when they express these things. So that's really a critically important part. All right, so I think we have. Oh yeah, I wanted to share some very interesting stuff. Qawwali is another important musical form that bridges all of these things: Sufi, Hindu, raga, folk, classical, everything, and you know, the classic example of the whole development of like Hindustani music was Amir Khusro, who was, you know, disciple of Hazrat Nizamuddin. And, you know, the idea is that, or they say, it's attributed to him. You know, he invented sitar, he invented tabla, he invented qawwali, he invented all of these things. And so there's always, like, the biggest thing in India is all of these things naturally melding together in some kind of natural fusion. Not the kind of fusion that we do now, but a type of natural fusion that's happening. So I'm going to play this clip from Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan Sahib, which is, you know, he's really like the true great. And here's another example of a type of folk music or non-classical music, you know, going into the international stage. I mean, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan Sahib is really the artist who kind of brought qawwali to an international stage. Now, amongst the hardcore qawwali fans, though, he's often criticized. He's often criticized because he used to sing a lot of sargam. Sargam means, you know, like nisagama, nisagama. Like, he brought in this classical touch which a lot of the more hardcore qawwali aficionados felt like, oh, he's bringing in too much of that classical stuff. He can just stick to singing the songs the way they should be sung. So here's an example, like someone trying to like classicalize or add these classical elements, and then getting kind of a pushback from the more, you might say conservative community. It's very fascinating. So here's a little bit of that sargam. And again, community of musicians, one big musician singing, others doing repetition. Okay, I could go on listening to this for a long time. I just wanted to show this as, just another example of this, again, classical folk interchange, because, a lot of times Nusrat ji, sang in pure rag with heavy sargam that even some classical artists would be amazed at. So that's one thing. The other thing, again, there's these ideas that, music is haram in Islam, and but look, this is what happens in India. This is what happens in South Asia. All of this becomes integrated. All of this evolves in a totally new way. I mean, there's so much music that happened, and so many things. All these rules that we think about. This should be this way. This should not be that way. All of that gets. Life is so much more complex and rich than that, and beautiful. So another example, qawwali, even as it evolved, of course, women were never allowed to sing qawwali. Now we're finding female qawwali artists, and you should see the same thing, Allahu song. You're going to hear now these two wonderful sisters singing. They're quite popular in Punjab right now, well, everywhere right now. But again, what we think of is canonical or the rule or the way, the marga of it, all of these things get broken down in practice. They evolve in much more interesting and complex ways. So we'll just end here on a little bit of music from these guys.
Allahu da awaaz aaya ve kulli फकीर दी विचों अल्लाह खुदा आवाज आया वे कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों अल्लाह खुदा आवाज आया वे कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों अल्लाह खुदा आवाज आया वे कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों कर बंदिया मेरी मेरी हो ना कर बंदिया मेरी ना कर बंदिया बंदिया हो बंदिया कर बंदिया मेरी मेरी हो ना कर बंदिया मेरी ना कर बंदिया मेरी दम दम सा कोई ना वसा कोई ना अल्लाह खुदा आवाज आवे कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों कुल्ली नी फकीर दी विचों साढ़े तीन हाथ धरती तेरी हो साढ़े तीन
All right, I'll pause it there. And just my last word that I will say is, you know, just even myself looking at all of this music and being a performer myself, music in its most fundamental sense is a devotion, you know, to whatever it is that you're devoted to. But it's an expression of deep devotion and feeling. And I feel like you can see that in all of these things. And you know, it's just a great gift in my life, and I really have to thank my teachers for giving me that opportunity, and and thank all of you. So thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions. I'll stop the screen share now.
Thank you very much.
Wait, I did have one last slide. Sorry.
Yeah.
Speaking of gurus, this is my guru. It's my Parama Guru. And this is what well, actually, just his translation of this. But music is wrung out of your heart, which alone it is given to enchant. Means it comes from inside, and it feeds that inside also. And that's really the heart of what music is to me, and to what these great artists showed. Okay, thank you.